The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training grounds as Sergeant James Rodriguez carefully cleaned his rifle for the third time that day. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision, but his attention kept drifting to the sniper scope mounted on top. The scope was old, its black metal coating worn down to patches of rust and bare steel. Small scratches covered the lens housing, and the adjustment knobs showed years of hard use. Other Marines walking past would often stop and stare, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Rodriguez had been using the same scope for over 8 years, refusing every offer to upgrade to newer equipment. The scope had been with him through 2 deployments, countless training exercises, and more shooting competitions than he could count. While other snipers showed off their pristine, high-tech optics with digital displays and advanced features, Rodriguez remained loyal to his trusted companion. The ribbing from his fellow Marines had become a daily routine. They called it the antique, rust bucket, and worse. Some of the younger recruits openly questioned how he could even see through it properly. The lens had a small chip on one edge, and the metal body bore the scars of desert sand, jungle humidity, and mountain cold. To everyone else, it looked like a piece of equipment that belonged in a museum, rather than in the hands of an active-duty Marine sniper. But Rodriguez knew something they didn't. This scope had never let him down. Every shot fired through its crosshairs had found its mark during training. Every mission where he relied on its magnification had ended successfully. The scope might look rough around the edges, but its internal mechanisms remained as precise as the day it was manufactured. The glass, despite its scratched exterior, still provided crystal-clear images of distant targets. That particular morning felt different somehow. The air was crisp and still, perfect conditions for long-range shooting. Rodriguez had been selected for a special demonstration that would take place in front of visiting military officials from several allied nations. The pressure was mounting, and he could feel the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders like a heavy pack. As he made final adjustments to his rifle, Rodriguez overheard 2 junior Marines talking nearby. One was pointing in his direction, clearly discussing the rusty scope. Their conversation carried just enough for him to catch fragments about embarrassing the unit and outdated equipment. He had heard it all before, but today the words stung a little more than usual. The demonstration range was set up at an impressive distance that would challenge even the most skilled marksman. Targets had been placed at various ranges, with the farthest one positioned at a distance that would test the limits of both equipment and human skill. Military observers from different countries had gathered to witness American military precision and capabilities. Rodriguez took his position on the firing line, his rifle steady on its bipod. Through his rusty scope, he surveyed the range, calculating wind patterns and environmental factors that could affect his shots. The familiar weight of the weapon felt comfortable in his hands, and the worn grip of the scope's adjustment knobs felt like old friends. Around him, other Marine snipers prepared their own rifles, their scopes gleaming with modern coatings and advanced technology. Some featured computerized ballistics calculators and rangefinders that could provide instant data about shooting conditions. The contrast between their equipment and Rodriguez's weathered scope was stark and obvious to everyone present. The range officer began explaining the shooting exercise to the gathered observers. Each sniper would attempt to hit targets at progressively longer distances, culminating in an extremely challenging long-range shot that would demonstrate the pinnacle of military marksmanship. The final target had been set at a distance that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible with standard military rifles. As Rodriguez listened to the briefing, he noticed some of the international observers whispering among themselves while looking at his equipment. He could imagine their thoughts about American military standards if this was the condition of their snipers' equipment. The weight of representing his unit, his branch of service, and his country suddenly felt heavier than ever before. The first round of shooting began with closer targets, allowing each sniper to warm up and verify their equipment was functioning properly. Rodriguez's shots struck their marks with consistent precision, but the real test lay ahead. The rusty scope that had drawn so much criticism was about to face its greatest challenge yet. With the eyes of military leadership from multiple nations watching every detail of the demonstration, the shooting exercise progressed through several stages, with targets placed at increasing distances. Rodriguez methodically engaged each one, his shots finding their marks with mechanical precision. However, He couldn't ignore the murmurs from the observation area. Every time he took position behind his rifle, the rusty scope seemed to draw more attention and whispered comments from the international visitors. Captain Morrison, the unit's commanding officer, approached Rodriguez between shooting stages. His expression was a mixture of concern and frustration as he knelt beside the Marine sniper. The captain had been fielding questions from the foreign military attachés about equipment standards and why one of his best snipers was using what appeared to be obsolete gear. "Rodriguez, I need to ask you one more time," Captain Morrison said quietly, his voice barely audible over the range activity. "Are you absolutely certain about using that scope today? We have 3 brand new models in the armory, fresh from the manufacturer, top-of-the-line optics with all the latest features. This demonstration is being recorded for military evaluation purposes." Rodriguez adjusted his position and looked through his scope once more, checking the distant targets that remained. The crosshairs were perfectly aligned, and the image clarity remained sharp despite the external appearance of the equipment. He had complete confidence in his ability and his gear, regardless of what others thought about its appearance. "Sir, this scope has never failed me," Rodriguez replied with quiet conviction. "I know every adjustment, every characteristic, every quirk it might have. Switching to unfamiliar equipment now could introduce variables that might affect performance. I'd rather trust what I know works than gamble on something new. Even if it looks better." The captain studied Rodriguez's face, recognizing the determination and confidence that had made him one of the unit's most reliable snipers. Despite the pressure from observers and the potential embarrassment if something went wrong, Morrison decided to trust his Marine's judgment. Sometimes experience and familiarity trumped appearance in technology. As the demonstration continued, the distances increased dramatically. Targets that had seemed challenging earlier now appeared almost easy compared to what lay ahead. The wind had picked up slightly, adding another variable to calculations that were already complex. Each sniper had to account for bullet drop, wind drift, temperature, humidity, and a dozen other factors that could affect accuracy. Rodriguez watched as his fellow Marines took their turns at the longer ranges. Their modern scopes adjusted with electronic precision, providing detailed ballistic information on small digital displays. Rangefinders calculated exact distances to targets, and some optics even provided wind speed readings. The technology was impressive, and most of the shots were successful. When Rodriguez's turn came for the long-range targets, he noticed an uncomfortable silence fall over the observation area. The international visitors had positioned themselves to get clear views of his shooting position, apparently curious to see how the Marine with the antiquated equipment would perform under pressure. He settled into his shooting position with practiced ease, his body forming a stable platform for the rifle. Through the rusty scope, Rodriguez studied the distant target, a standard military silhouette that appeared tiny at such extreme range. The target seemed to shimmer slightly in the heat waves rising from the ground, adding another challenge to an already difficult shot. Rodriguez began his pre-shot routine, the same mental checklist he had used hundreds of times before. He estimated wind speed by observing grass movement and dust patterns. He calculated the approximate bullet drop for the distance and made the necessary scope adjustments. His breathing slowed and became more controlled as he prepared for the shot. The scratched lens of his scope didn't interfere with his ability to see the target clearly. Years of training had taught him to focus on the essential elements while filtering out distractions. The small chip in the glass was positioned where it didn't obstruct his view of the target area. Everything he needed to make an accurate shot was visible and clear. Behind him, Rodriguez could hear the whispered conversations of the observers. Some were questioning American military standards, while others seemed genuinely curious about whether skill could overcome outdated equipment. A few voices expressed doubt about the upcoming shot, suggesting that the Marine might be setting himself up for public failure. As Rodriguez made his final scope adjustments, he reflected on the countless hours of training that had brought him to this moment. The rusty scope had been his companion through desert training exercises, where sand had worn away its finish. It had performed flawlessly during mountain training, where temperature extremes tested every piece of equipment. In jungle environments where humidity could fog lenses and corrode metal, his scope had remained reliable. The target in his crosshairs represented more than just a shooting challenge. It was a test of everything he believed about the relationship between a sniper and his equipment. While others relied on technology to compensate for variables, Rodriguez had learned to read conditions and make adjustments based on experience and intuition developed over years of practice. The range fell completely silent as Rodriguez prepared for what everyone knew would be the most challenging shot of the demonstration. The final target had been positioned at an extraordinary distance that pushed the absolute limits of the rifle and ammunition combination. Even with perfect conditions and the most advanced equipment, success was far from guaranteed. Rodriguez controlled his breathing, allowing his heart rate to slow as he entered the focused mental state that all expert marksmen developed over years of practice. Through his weathered scope, he could barely make out the target silhouette. At such extreme range, the target appeared as little more than a dark speck against the distant hillside backdrop. The wind had become more complex, shifting direction slightly every few seconds as air currents moved across the varied terrain between his position and the target. Rodriguez observed grass movement at several points along the bullet's projected path, noting how the wind patterns changed with distance. These observations would be crucial for calculating the precise holdover needed to compensate for wind drift. Colonel Patterson, the senior officer overseeing the demonstration, approached with a rangefinder to confirm the exact distance to the target. The reading showed a distance that made several of the international observers shake their heads in amazement. Even with perfect conditions and equipment, attempting such a shot bordered on the impossible. Sergeant Rodriguez, Colonel Patterson announced loud enough for all observers to hear, "You are attempting a shot at 1,875 meters. Weather conditions show variable winds between 8 and 12 miles per hour, with temperature at 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Do you wish to proceed with your current equipment?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone present understood that the colonel was offering Rodriguez one final opportunity to switch to more modern equipment. The distance was so extreme that even small advantages provided by advanced optics could make the difference between success and failure. Rodriguez looked up from his scope and surveyed the faces watching him. Some showed skepticism, others curiosity, and a few displayed genuine concern for his reputation and that of his unit. He understood that failure at such a public moment would provide ammunition for critics who questioned American military equipment standards and training methods. "Sir, I'll proceed with my current setup," Rodriguez replied firmly. "This scope and I have been through worse conditions together. I trust it completely." A murmur rippled through the group of international observers. Several were taking notes, apparently documenting what they considered either supreme confidence or dangerous overconfidence. The demonstration was being recorded for later analysis, ensuring that Rodriguez's performance would be scrutinized in detail regardless of the outcome. Rodriguez returned to his shooting position and began making final calculations. The bullet would take several seconds to reach the target at such extreme range, during which time gravity would pull it significantly below the line of sight. Wind would push it sideways by several feet if not properly compensated. Temperature and humidity would affect the bullet's ballistic performance in subtle but measurable ways. Using his rusty scope's adjustment knobs, Rodriguez dialed in what he calculated to be the correct elevation and windage corrections. The knobs clicked with the same precise mechanical sounds they had made for 8 years. Despite their worn appearance, the internal mechanisms remained as accurate as more expensive alternatives. The mathematics of the shot were staggering. At nearly 2,000 meters, the bullet would drop more than 30 feet below the line of sight. Wind drift could easily push it several feet left or right of the target. The slightest error in calculation or execution would result in a complete miss, potentially by a wide margin. Rodriguez settled deeper into his shooting position, allowing his body to relax while maintaining the rigid stability necessary for precision shooting. His left hand supported the rifle's weight while his right hand gripped the stock with just enough pressure to maintain control without inducing tremors. His cheek pressed against the stock in exactly the same position he had used for thousands of previous shots. Through the scope, Rodriguez focused on the tiny target image, allowing his eyes to relax and see the complete sight picture, rather than trying to force perfect clarity. The crosshairs appeared sharp and distinct against the blurred background. Years of experience had taught him that overthinking the visual aspects of aiming often led to poor shots. The wind seemed to pause momentarily, providing a brief window of relatively stable conditions. Rodriguez recognized the opportunity and began his final shooting sequence. His breathing became even more controlled, with each exhale bringing him closer to the natural respiratory pause where his body would be most stable. In the observation area, conversations had stopped completely. Everyone present understood they were witnessing either a demonstration of extraordinary skill or a spectacular failure. The stakes were high enough that the outcome would likely be discussed and analyzed for years to come within military circles. Rodriguez felt his heartbeat slow to its minimum rate as he reached the natural pause between breaths. This was the moment every sniper trained for, when the body achieved maximum stability and the mind focused with laser-like intensity on a single objective. His finger applied steady pressure to the trigger, taking up the slack with gradual precision. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. Rodriguez maintained his position behind the scope, following through with perfect technique as he watched for the bullet's impact. At such extreme distance, several seconds would pass before anyone could determine whether the shot had been successful. The bullet traveled its long arc through the air, fighting against gravity and wind resistance as it covered nearly 2,000 meters of varied terrain. Mathematical calculations had guided its initial trajectory, but now physics and environmental factors would determine its final destination. Every variable Rodriguez had estimated would either prove accurate or reveal themselves as errors. In the observation area, military officials raised binoculars and spotting scopes, trying to track the bullet's path and identify where it would impact. The distance was so great that even with magnification, seeing the actual bullet strike would be challenging. They would have to wait for confirmation from the target area. Rodriguez remained motionless behind his rifle, his eyes still pressed to the rusty scope as he watched the distant target location. Years of experience had taught him to maintain his shooting position until impact was confirmed, avoiding any movement that might affect his ability to observe the results or make quick corrections for follow-up shots. The radio crackled to life as the spotter positioned near the target area prepared to report the results. Everyone on the firing line and in the observation area strained to hear the announcement that would determine whether Rodriguez's confidence in his weathered equipment had been justified or misplaced. Impact, came the voice through the radio speaker, followed by a pause that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Rodriguez continued watching through his scope, waiting for the complete report that would tell him exactly where his bullet had struck. Target hit, the spotter continued, his voice carrying a note of amazement. Center mass impact. Excellent shot. A stunned silence fell over the range as the implications of the announcement sank in. Rodriguez had not only hit the extremely distant target, but had placed his shot in the center scoring area. Using equipment that most observers had written off as obsolete, he had accomplished what many considered nearly impossible, even with the most advanced gear available. Rodriguez finally lifted his head from the scope, a quiet smile crossing his face as he engaged the rifle's safety. The familiar weight of his trusted scope suddenly felt even more comfortable than usual. He had proven once again that the partnership between sniper and equipment depended more on knowledge and experience than on technology and appearance. The international observers began talking rapidly among themselves, clearly impressed by what they had witnessed. Several approached Colonel Patterson with questions about Rodriguez's training background and the specifications of his equipment. The Marine with the rusty scope had just redefined their understanding of what was possible with seemingly outdated gear. Captain Morrison was the first to reach Rodriguez's position, his earlier concerns replaced by obvious pride and relief. The demonstration had exceeded all expectations, and his decision to trust Rodriguez's judgment had been completely vindicated. The unit's reputation had been enhanced rather than damaged by the unconventional equipment choice. "Outstanding shooting, Rodriguez," Captain Morrison said, extending his hand in congratulations. "I think you've made quite an impression on our international guests. Several of them are asking if they can examine your scope more closely." Rodriguez began the process of making his rifle safe, removing the bolt and checking the chamber as required by range safety protocols. His movements were calm and methodical, showing none of the excitement or relief that others might have displayed after such a successful performance under pressure. "The scope did its job, sir," Rodriguez replied simply. "It always has." As word of the extraordinary shot spread throughout the base, Marines from other units began arriving to see the rifle and scope that had just made military history. The distance and accuracy of the shot exceeded most previous records, especially considering the age and appearance of the equipment used. The rusty scope that had been the subject of so much ridicule and doubt was now being examined with respectful curiosity by some of the most experienced marksmen in the military. They wanted to understand how such an unimpressive-looking piece of equipment could produce such remarkable results in the hands of a skilled operator. Rodriguez patiently answered questions about his scope's history and specifications, explaining how he had learned its characteristics through years of use. He described the small adjustments and techniques he had developed to compensate for any quirks or limitations the aging equipment might have developed over time. News of Rodriguez's extraordinary shot spread rapidly through military channels and beyond. Within hours, reports were being filed by defense correspondents who had witnessed the demonstration. The story of a Marine sniper achieving an impossible shot with rusted, outdated equipment captured imaginations across the military community and civilian population alike. Military equipment manufacturers began requesting detailed information about the scope's specifications and condition. Engineers wanted to understand how an 8-year-old optic with obvious wear and damage could outperform their latest technological marvels. The success challenged assumptions about the relationship between equipment condition and operational capability. Rodriguez found himself at the center of attention he had never sought or expected. Interview requests came from military publications, weapons magazines, and even mainstream news outlets interested in the human interest angle of the story. The humble Marine who had simply trusted his equipment was now being hailed as an example of skill triumphing over technology. The international military observers who had witnessed the demonstration carried the story back to their respective countries. Rodriguez's shot became a topic of discussion in military academies and training facilities worldwide. Instructors used it as an example of why fundamental marksmanship skills remained more important than reliance on advanced technology. Within his own unit, the atmosphere had changed completely. Marines who had previously mocked his rusty scope now treated it with something approaching reverence. Some asked if they could examine it more closely, wanting to understand what made it special. Others requested advice about equipment selection and maintenance. Rodriguez remained characteristically modest about the attention, insisting that the shot had been the result of training and preparation, rather than any special qualities of his equipment. He emphasized that the scope had performed exactly as he had expected it to, based on years of experience with its characteristics and limitations. The base armorer, Master Sergeant Chen, requested permission to examine the scope in detail to understand how it had maintained its accuracy, despite its worn appearance. His professional assessment revealed that while the external finish was heavily weathered, the internal optical elements and mechanical systems remained within factory specifications. This scope has been maintained properly, despite its rough appearance, Master Sergeant Chen reported to unit leadership. The glass is clean, the mechanisms are properly lubricated, and the calibration is still accurate. It's a testament to both military equipment durability and proper maintenance practices. Rodriguez's shooting log revealed the scope's impressive history. Over 8 years of service, it had been used for thousands of rounds of live fire training, multiple combat deployments, and dozens of competitive shooting events. The wear patterns told the story of consistent, professional use rather than neglect or abuse. The manufacturer of the scope reached out to Rodriguez directly, requesting permission to feature his story in their marketing materials. They wanted to showcase the durability and longevity of their products, using his success as proof that their optics could perform reliably even after years of hard military service. Military historians began documenting the shot as one of the longest confirmed hits in military demonstration history. The combination of distance, equipment condition, and environmental factors made it a unique achievement that would likely be studied and referenced for years to come. Official records were updated to include the details of Rodriguez's accomplishment. Training protocols at sniper schools began incorporating discussions about equipment familiarity versus technological advancement. Instructors used Rodriguez's example to teach students about the importance of understanding their equipment's characteristics rather than simply relying on automated features and digital displays. The story reached beyond military circles when civilian shooting enthusiasts learned about the achievement. Online forums dedicated to long-range shooting began lengthy discussions about technique versus technology. Rodriguez's shot became a rallying point for those who believed that skill and experience were more important than expensive equipment. Rodriguez received orders to attend an advanced marksmanship instructor course, where his experience and techniques would be studied and potentially incorporated into future training programs. Military leadership recognized that his approach to equipment selection and maintenance contained valuable lessons for other snipers. The rusty scope that had once been a source of embarrassment became a symbol of military professionalism and competence. Its scarred exterior told the story of years of faithful service, while its continued accuracy demonstrated the value of proper maintenance and operator skill over flashy appearance. Young Marines entering sniper training programs learned about Rodriguez's shot as part of their initial instruction. The story became a standard example used to teach the importance of confidence in one's equipment and the value of extensive training with familiar gear rather than constantly seeking technological solutions to marksmanship challenges. Years later, Rodriguez's shot remained a legendary moment in military shooting history. The rusty scope had been retired to a place of honor in the unit's trophy case, where it served as a daily reminder that excellence came from the marriage of skill and equipment knowledge rather than technological superiority alone. Rodriguez continued his military career with the same quiet professionalism that had always characterized his service. He never sought special recognition for his famous shot, viewing it simply as one successful moment in a career dedicated to military excellence. When asked about that day, he consistently emphasized the importance of training and preparation over any single achievement. The scope itself became something of a pilgrimage destination for visiting military personnel and shooting enthusiasts. People would travel considerable distances just to see the weathered optic that had made such an impossible shot possible. Its scarred metal and scratched lens told the story of years of faithful service better than any written account could convey. Military equipment procurement policies were quietly influenced by Rodriguez's demonstration. Acquisition officers began placing greater emphasis on durability and long-term reliability, rather than focusing exclusively on the latest technological features. The lesson that well-maintained older equipment could outperform newer alternatives had significant implications for military budgets and planning. Rodriguez eventually became a senior instructor at the Marine Corps' premier sniper school, where his teaching methods emphasized fundamental skills and equipment mastery. His classes always included the story of the famous shot, but he used it to illustrate principles rather than to glorify the achievement itself. Students in Rodriguez's courses learned that understanding their equipment's characteristics was as important as learning shooting techniques. He taught them to document their scope's behavior under different conditions, to track any changes in performance over time, and to maintain their gear with meticulous care regardless of its appearance. The international military observers who had witnessed the original demonstration continued to reference it in their own training programs. The story became part of military folklore in several countries, always emphasizing the importance of individual skill and preparation over technological dependence. Defense contractors began conducting more rigorous durability testing on their optical equipment, partly inspired by the performance of Rodriguez's aging scope. Marketing departments discovered that stories of long-term reliability were often more compelling to military customers than lists of advanced features that might never be needed in actual use. Rodriguez's former scope was eventually displayed at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, where it joined other artifacts representing significant moments in military history. The museum's display included detailed information about the shot and its significance in demonstrating the continuing importance of individual marksmanship skills. Civilian shooting sports adopted some of the lessons from Rodriguez's achievement. Long-range shooting competitions began including categories that emphasize skill over equipment, encouraging participants to focus on technique rather than constantly upgrading their gear. The story inspired countless recreational shooters to pay more attention to learning their equipment's characteristics. Military historians noted that Rodriguez's shot represented a broader truth about the relationship between technology and human capability. In an era of increasing automation and digital assistance, His achievement demonstrated that fundamental skills and deep equipment knowledge remained irreplaceable elements of military effectiveness. The Marines who had once mocked Rodriguez's rusty scope learned a lasting lesson about making assumptions based on appearance. Many of them went on to become leaders themselves, carrying forward the understanding that capability and reliability were not always obvious from external examination. Rodriguez retired from active duty with numerous commendations and awards, though none meant more to him than the respect of his fellow Marines and the knowledge that he had served with distinction. The famous shot remained just one highlight in a career filled with consistent professional excellence and dedication to military values. Today, the story of the Marine with the rusty scope continues to be told in military training facilities around the world. It serves as a reminder that in the hands of a skilled and dedicated professional, even weathered equipment can achieve extraordinary results. The lesson endures that mastery comes not from having the newest gear, but from understanding completely the tools you choose to trust with your mission and your life.